Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show, and you guys know my story, so I won't go too deep into it. I'm a recovering lawyer, recovering political hack. Spent years working in politics and in law. Discovered this medium of podcasting about 10 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. And it's one of the best benefits and gifts I've ever experienced in my life. You get to talk with so many amazing individuals, and I was just reflecting back on the past year and some of the great people that I've talked to. One of whom is on the other end of the line. And we started this series in this past year of doing live episodes where we go deep on talking about a topic related to podcasting and content marketing. And that's what we do at Rise25, where we help B2B businesses with the strategy and the production that they need to create a podcast that produces tremendous ROI and connects them with their ideal prospects and referral partners. And before we get started with this episode, I want to give a big shout out to two people. Dan Rollins over at Livewire Films. He's a video strategist, really smart guy, and doing great things with videos. So check him out. And then also Alexi Cashin of the Alexi Cashin podcast and Ellen Tenney Imports. Alexi started a podcast in the last year. We've been privileged to work with her on it. And we just recorded a big episode that's coming out this Friday, talking about all the amazing insights and ideas and relationships that have come from doing her podcast. So that'll be released on Friday. I'm really excited for that episode with her. But today we're going to be talking about how to learn faster. This is kind of one of those unexpected benefits of doing a podcast. And Jeremy, you and I, we talk about podcasting as a Swiss Army knife. It's like a tool that can do so many different things at once. There's so many benefits: business development, content marketing, referral marketing, up-leveling your network, strategic partnerships. There's so many different ways in which a podcast can benefit you and bring value to your life. Even if you build a tremendous Joe Rogan size audience, I would continue doing it because of all those benefits. And professional development is a huge one. I can say over the last 10 years, there have been individual conversations I can think of that wouldn't have happened unless I was doing it for the podcast, and insights that came from that, which resulted in massive changes and impact to my business. And I don't know of any better way, frankly, to be able to talk to smart people, ask them questions, and learn. So let's dive into this topic, Jeremy. So what do you think of when I say podcasting is professional development? It is constant learning.
Yeah, I think the best advice that I've ever been given was find a mentor. And that could mean in health, that could mean in wealth, that could mean in anything. We can go more specific, which I know to talk about, finding a salesperson, like specific advice. It could be on investment. So the best advice I've ever gotten is find someone who's done what you want to do or is doing what you want to do. And we found no better way to do that. If there's something in your life, you mentioned learn faster, leapfrog the learning curve by going to someone that you want to learn from, and you could have them on your show and actually learn from that person. Like, let's say, you know what I mean? There's a book I read, one of my favorites, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And I read it. It's, ex-hostage negotiator, FBI hostage negotiator. I got it not for business, but for parenting, because kids, if you have kids,
It is like,
I swear to God, it's like a hostage. It's like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not going, like, I'm not putting my shirt on. I'm not putting my jacket on. I'm not doing this. It's like there's a
There's
standoff.
nothing you can do about it.
A standoff, right? How many standoffs do you go through a day with your 4 kids?
Yeah.
I mean,
all day long.
Stop touching him. Don't do that. But it's like everything, right? And so I listened to that book for parenting purposes. Okay, if he deals with terrorists, then maybe I can apply some of these same methodology, the same methods to negotiating with my kids. But
and you were a really early advocate of Chris Voss's work. And I remember you years ago talking about him, and now he's done a master class. I mean, he's done big speeches. He's become this big thought leader and influencer.
yeah, so I wanted to learn. My point is I want to learn from him more in depth, and I could ask the questions I want to ask him. Specifically, I had him on the podcast, right? And I was able to learn from him. And then we ended up going to dinner when he came to Chicago. And so you get to learn from the best of the best. Yeah, and he has a master class and masterclass.com. So it's just, you can shortcut. And when you're reading a book, if you're listening to this person, you can go right to the source and ask the questions that you want to know, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's really one of the big benefits of using a podcast as professional development is you get to talk to the source directly. You get to talk to experts directly, and you get to ask them questions that you're curious about, right? You know, because the magic of it is that it's not just you calling up someone asking to pick their brain, which no one really likes, right? But it's actually you're recording it, you're showcasing their expertise, you're sharing their thought leadership, even if you don't have a tremendous number of listeners. It is an amazing gesture to take time out of your day. It takes money, no doubt about it, to create that content and then to share it with the world. But you know, it's also another big benefit of it is that it can lead to further partnerships. It can lead to further learning. It can lead to further, as you mentioned, going to dinner with an individual afterwards. It could lead to, I'm a big advocate of meeting up with someone later in person. Maybe it's at a conference, you go to an industry conference and you can meet up with people. So talk a little bit about some of those other further benefits which can come from using the podcast as a professional development tool.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of benefits, obviously, like just content wise, putting it out there and having other people watch it and learn about you is huge, right? And that goes across, as we know with a podcast, you can put it across, you know, over 17, 20 different channels. You could put it on social media, you could put it on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the channels. So more people are discovering that conversation. So it doesn't live in a bubble, but you're actually pushing that conversation out to, you know, all these platforms so more people can discover it. You know, I was talking to a guest today that I had on my podcast, and he's like, "Oh, I love what your and John's interactions." I'm like, "Well, like an old married couple, like you guys." I don't know if he said good dynamic. I think he meant we like bicker actually as we're talking, but he was able to listen to that because we put it on all the channels. And so that's a benefit. Obviously, you know, we formed our business partnership because of podcasting. We've had many people that referral partners that we refer to them, they refer to us through the podcast as well. But from a professional development standpoint, I wonder if you talk about that one specific example that happened recently about the sales process.
Thank you for reminding me. So the part of what inspired this discussion was a client I was talking to yesterday who had a key person who's leaving. And so, you know, he was talking about, I got to spend all this time. I got to recruit someone, hire, train someone up, you know, and it's a lot of work when you lose someone. And I said, look, you got to use the podcast as a tool for that. Go out and you could do a series focused on that. You know, in this case, it was someone who was in a sales role. So, you know, you can go out and you can get access. You know, we had a client who interviewed, you know, Jack Daly, who's kind of the king of sales out there. There's lots of big sales experts out there. Jim Padilla comes to mind as another sales expert who I've had on my podcast. Jeremy, I'm sure you've had a ton of different sales experts out there, and that's tremendous.
Joey Gilkey is one. I'd be like, I'd have Joey Gilkey on, and you know, you could promote what Joey is working on and give to him, and then ask the questions you want on hiring the best salesperson.
Right, and you know, Jason Swank is another sales expert, and now we belong to a community that Jason organizes that Joey is also in. And so it goes from an initial conversation where you're featuring that person on the podcast to then a much deeper conversation and longer conversation where you have further interaction. And so, so I said, you know, don't look at it as the podcast is an additional thing that you have to do, but integrate it into your current needs in life where it actually will save you time. Because you know, if you were just hiring for a regular role within your company and you tried to call up all these different experts and say, hey, can I pick your brain about this role that I need to hire for in my company, they'll be like, okay, where's my check, right? But when you're doing the podcast, it doesn't work that way. You're actually giving them exposure. You're delivering value to them. They're not doing you a favor. You're doing them a favor, and you're learning at the same time. So that was a big message for him, and a big aha moment for him, was realizing, oh, wow, you're right. I can actually use this as an opportunity to further up-level my knowledge base and learn more about this role, and also use it as a tool to recruit. And we know many people, this has happened with us, where as you mentioned, our business partnership came through podcasting. But in addition to that, you might hire someone. You might end up filling the role through either directly or indirectly. Maybe someone that you interview, who you then hire, or maybe you interview someone and then they immediately afterwards introduce you to someone who then leads to you filling that role.
Yeah, I remember we were at Brian Kurtz's event, and we were speaking and attending, and Joe Polish was talking, and he said, I would podcast if no one was listening. And the reason he gave next was not necessarily the one I was expecting. The reason he gave was exactly what you said. He goes, for the professional development and learning alone, I would podcast if no one else was listening, because I get to talk with some of the best people in the world and learn from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what it is. I can remember, another friend of ours, Kevin Thompson, that conversation, that interview that I had with him was about 6 or 7 years ago now. And this is an amazing guy. He had worked on commercial fishing boats. You think of like what's it called? The Deadliest Catch. He worked on those types of boats. Then he'd started his own business, like it was like, I forget exactly, a cleaning business or something like that.
Carpet cleaning.
Yeah, carpet cleaning, right. And then that's how I discovered Joe Polish. And for him, the big insight was that he could do these teleseminars where he would train people, and he would partner with people. So he'd go to conferences. He was really good at making friends with people. And then he would offer to do a training for them. And he didn't need to reinvent himself. He had one training that worked. He would do it over and over again. And when I had that interview with him, I realized, oh, that's my superpower too, is I can connect with people, build a relationship. I could create a training once and I could do it over and over again. And the year following my interview with him, I want to say over 50 different, in my case, webinar trainings, because of that insight that I got from that one conversation. It blew me away. It really helped my transition from practicing law into a new business, and made it a lot more profitable. So it's a big impact. The other thing, the third benefit that I wanted to mention is really, it's about discipline, because it's so easy for many of us. Jeremy, I know you read hundreds of books a year. You're on Audible. You're always listening to a different book. I aspire to hit that point. But for many people, we get busy with work, life, family, that sort of thing, and we forget to be constantly learning, constantly reading. And a podcast is you
probably read about 4 books a day because you have 4 kids. You're probably reading different stories.
That's true. They're all 6 pages long, but I do read 4 books a day.
There you go.
That's true. That's true. And it's mostly pictures, frankly. But
that's the best kind of book. I love it.
Exactly. But so really doing the podcast is a forced discipline, this in 2020, when COVID hit in March, I made the decision for the first time in 10 years of doing a podcast to double my output, to go from putting out 1 episode a week to putting out 2 episodes a week. And the reason I did that was because I had no idea what was going to happen, but I knew that doubling the number of relationships I was building and deepening was the right choice, that it would lead to good things. And it was a forced discipline. It forced me to read books for people that I was having on the podcast, not every time, but most of the time. It forced me to learn about them. It forced me to ask them questions. It forced me to be engaged in the conversation and ask follow-up questions, reflecting and built based upon answers that they'd given in the interview. So I think that piece of it is the forced discipline of uploading your knowledge base is an important point. Do you want to follow up?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, I try and listen to Audible every single week, but if there's a book I really want to listen to, usually as a forced discipline, I will ask that person to be on my podcast, because that means I will listen to the book. I'm guaranteed. It's almost like studying for a test. Like, when do you study for a test? You study the night before.
Yeah.
You study the night before, because you're like, oh, I'm so busy. So it forces me to listen or read the book because I know their book's important, that I should be reading it, but maybe it's not priority with everything I have going on. Same thing with you, but it makes a priority when I'm going to be talking to them the next day. And I want to show up and listen to it. So I will create that forced discipline by having that guest on.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. And, one additional one I was just thinking of, Kim Walsh Phillips. She's an amazing trainer, salesperson. We've learned a lot from her. We've hired her over the years. She's come to events of ours. We've partnered and collaborated with her on so many different things. And, I was just listening to an episode that she did on the Built to Sell podcast where she was talking about selling her business. I was getting insights from that, even we've gotten so many insights from talking to her, but I was getting insights even from just listening to her being interviewed on this podcast, because she was talking about some things I hadn't heard her talk about before. So just even, listening to that and getting that knowledge, we haven't even mentioned the benefit of listening to podcasts, but of course that is an additional benefit because I will go and listen to a bunch of other episodes of someone who's going to be a guest on my podcast before I interview them. So then there's that additional benefit too, because whether you're a regular consumer of podcasts or not, I will go and listen to other episodes in preparation for interviewing someone as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned an additional benefit that I always think about, which is how do we serve our current network, right? We always want to give to our network, and the more guests we have on, we get to introduce them to other amazing people in our network. And so, like when I was having dinner with Chris when he was coming to Chicago, and then Brian Kurtz and Richard Rossi, who we both know, were coming in town for a strategic coach, and they were putting together a group of entrepreneurs to have dinner with. And I go, do you mind if I bring someone? And I sent him his bio, and they're like, oh, of course. Yeah, you could bring him. He's amazing. But I was able to introduce him to the network that I had, right? And so that's another additional benefit.
Yeah, and I'll bet he ended up speaking at Genius Network, or he ended up speaking at one of Richard Rossi's events, or something came from that dinner.
One guy in the room was really successful entrepreneur, but was a huge fanboy of Chris, and he was like, ended up sitting next to him at dinner, and he's like, I've bought 100 of your books and given them to 100 different of my friends. So yeah, it was just
that's cool.
Yeah,
cool.
It's
and
just
then
great.
Chris ends up grateful to you. Sometimes we forget about these things, but I try and do the same thing where you kind of try and introduce people, especially someone who's been a guest on your podcast, or you've gotten a lot of value from them. You try and repay the favor by introducing them to someone else of value. And I'll do that. And years later, I'll kind of forget about it. And I'll reach back out to that person and be like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I had you on my podcast a while back. We connected. And they'll be like, remember you? Of course I remember you. Yeah, you introduced me to this other person. We started a business together. And that has happened a number of times where people have said we started a business together. Or I can think of another occasion where someone actually relocated. They moved from the city they were living in to another city because they started a business with another person, Ben Settle. And they ended up living in the same city together so they could do that business. So it was really cool.
So many benefits.
Any final thoughts on this, or shall we wrap it up?
No, my only final thought, John, and we've been saying this before, was self-serving, but I said this on the episode that I just did earlier today. And I said, if you have a business, you should have a podcast. You wouldn't have a website or not have a website. If you have a business, you have a website. Right. And so we've always said, if you have a business, you should have a podcast, period, hands down. Doesn't matter if you use us or whatever it is, but it's just so beneficial in so many ways.
Yeah. And to take that analogy even further, you know what? So often a website it's a stack of glossy flyers in the corner. You might need them from time to time. Like someone will stop by, they look at the glossy flyer, they get a better understanding who you are. The podcast is the conversations. It's the engagement. It's talking to your best potential clients, your best referral partners, your best champions, the people that already know, like, and love you, that are already out there telling the world about you. It's about deepening that relationship even further so that they will go out and tell others about you. That's really what it's about. It's not the classic glossy stack of flyers that will sit in the corner. Not to minimize a website. We all need to have websites, just like we need flyers from time to time. But we also need to have conversations with people. And that's what I love about it. Jeremy, where can people go to learn more about you, learn more about us and the work that we do?
Yeah, you could just go to rise25.com and then you go to the About page. We actually tell, someone the other day brought up about the stories of our grandfathers. People actually surprisingly read our About page, but it has our background, as your very impressive background, the White House and other places, and also kind of what motivates us to do this, which is sort of our grandfather's story collectively.
Yeah. Go check that out, rise25.com. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk again.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.